Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. The topic of this video is good and evil in SHTF, essentially, and perhaps how to discern who is good and who is evil in a SHTF. One of the things I've been thinking about is how morality becomes intricately disguised the more sophisticated a society becomes. You've heard that phrase, things were simple in the old days, and I believe they will be simple again in an SHTF situation. People will be concerned with meeting their needs and not necessarily meeting their desires. They won't be concerned with making themselves out to be things that they're not. With that comes a more clear-cut distinction with respect to who's good and who's bad. Because of it, we'll be able to see who is quote-unquote good and who is quote-unquote evil. Now, ethics, I guess the term ethics is sort of similar to the term morality. It's sort of a combination of morality and the socially agreed upon norms, which sort of takes law into consideration to a point where some would say, what's legal is what's ethical. Now, in the absence of those laws and in the absence of crooked lawyers, it's going to become much easier to see who is evil and who isn't. This is sort of difficult in the modern day as evil, quote unquote, of course, is diluted with law to such an extent that good can be bought in some instances, as lawyers can be bought. So what our society says is good, of course, isn't not necessarily what is the truth of what's good. It's just what we've agreed is good, and that's what ethics are. In the absence of that culture, it's going to become pretty clear. Things are going to be a lot more simpler, so we're going to be able to more easily distinguish, who's good and who's bad. Either people will be looting and stealing and, marauding, raping perhaps, or maybe they'll even be working for the government. Maybe in an excessive rule of law situation, it'll come down to who works for the powers that be and who is the rest of us. Who supports Big Brother and the party, and who are the proles, essentially, if you've watched 1984. Or else there'll be, the people who are trading with you and helping you and protecting you and sharing with you and, just the good-natured person that you can trust. There's a person who might knock on your door and humbly ask you for some help. They might ask you for some water or some supplies, and you might choose to give them some, and they'll take what they're given and they go on their way. And then, of course, there's the other person who will just come and try to take it. And, for whatever reason, they've justified it in their minds. Maybe they don't think that what they're doing is wrong. But, for me, and some people will say that morality is not, there is no absolute morality. And I think that we can, although I don't identify as Christian, I think the whole idea of doing unto others as you would do unto yourself is a pretty good general rule to follow for morality. So this idea, that the longer SHTF persists, the more we perhaps regress socially into a more sort of primal state of being, the more clear-cut the distinction will be between who is a good guy and who is a bad guy. So sometimes I find myself, just looking at people and if I'm bored, or perhaps the thought just occurs to me to do this, but I'll just imagine how certain people will be in an SHTF situation, and it's a good exercise to try sometime. Many people in our society are repressed, and that whole idea goes back to the Freudian school, in which they thought that man, civilization has been put on man, and that man's urges have been put in chains, and that the only way he can express himself, he or she, of course, is through what they call catharsis and sublimation, they call it. And basically what that is catharsis and sublimation are ways that we can vent our primal urges through socially acceptable means. So in the modern day, people do this with things like sports and video games, things which are remotely aggressive, pornography, watching movies, maybe scary movies. It's kind of like the Roman idea of the Colosseum. You give them bread and circuses, to distract them from what's going on. Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned, type thing. And so in the absence of all these distractions, which are part of our grid-based culture, these urges have nowhere else to go but back into those primal things. So it's going to be interesting to see, what blood is running through everybody's veins, and to see which side of the fence they fall on. Some of those people that you shake hands with today, in the absence of this web, this social web, this very delicate social grid, this web that we've created, that they have a means of diffusing their urges and gratifying their desires, what kind of person will they become, when that's no longer an option? We can only speculate, of course, but perhaps there's a healthy way to speculate, or a healthier way to speculate. So I work with a lot of people, co-workers and clients, who I sometimes wonder, how might they act in a WROL situation where resources are scarce and people have to exercise a certain level of self-restraint and make decisions regarding self-sacrifice and empathy and choices regarding those things. What might they be capable of doing? And what I've come to believe is this. I've come to believe that our personality traits will become magnified in an SHTF, such that if you know somebody who is kind of sort of an asshole while the grid is up and there is rule of law, and there are those punitive measures in place that prevent them from perhaps going all out, well, you can almost guarantee that they're going to be an even bigger asshole in an SHTF under most circumstances. Sometimes you might have these people on your side depending on, what sort of situation presents itself. I mean, you might find yourself with a couple assholes in your group who are helping you from an other group, quote unquote, others, it all depends, but for the most part, at some point down the road, that person's asshole dumb, if you will, is going to become so magnified and obvious that it's going to really start to be problematic for the people around them. In the same way, if you know somebody who is very timid and passive, there's a couple ways that could go, I suppose. Will they be liabilities, and that they'll be a magnet for the psychopathic leader types, the brainwashing follow me types, will they be yes men for the bad guys? Will they be the sort of misguided, useful idiots, so to speak? Or will they just sort of mind their own business and possibly, because of their passivity, perhaps perish because they could not defend themselves, or they didn't, they weren't assertive enough. See, the idea is that psychopathy is reined in our society, and there are lots of people who cleverly suppress it, and they channel it into either the work that they do, whether it's a corporate CEO who, exploits, people far, far away for a lot of money, and who all, work in sweatshops and stuff like that. Or it's the guy who's, the mass murderer guy who wears the suit, the American Psycho type character, right? I heard a statistic about pedophiles, and it's that most pedophiles don't actually try to offend for fear of repercussions, legal repercussions. So the question becomes, what happens if that's no longer in place? Is there going to be more of that when the grid goes down? Also, people who have no real moral obligations. And I'm not just talking about people who aren't quote unquote religious, or, I'm just talking about people who, maybe they have a really sort of nihilistic view of the world, and maybe they could be liabilities too. They could be just as liable as those who are very self-righteous and who, in the name of religion, will go and stomp out other colonies, go on a crusade. So I believe that, with the right frame of mind and trying to be honest and unbiased and unpresumptuous, that one can make analytical observations about who would be problematic in an SHTF situation and who wouldn't. And perhaps one way to go about doing this is looking for those idiosyncratic traits in people that, if magnified, they will become big problems. So if you know somebody at work who kind of backstabs you, that could be a big problem. If you know somebody who is kind of neurotic and, sketchy, and, that could be problematic also. Angry people who are always hair triggered, they're probably not going to last too long because, assholes get wiped, as they say. But all assholes get wiped, I heard it said. I heard that in a movie somewhere. But, people who are aggressive, people who are passive, people who are passive-aggressive, people who, like the people who go postal, who get picked on their whole lives and hold it all in and then explode out on people, people who are selfish, people who don't like sharing cheapskates, if that was magnified, So look for those idiosyncratic traits in people that, if magnified, would be very problematic. Those who tend to help other people, and I'm not just talking about people who do it because it's expected, or, that they want something in return, or maybe they feel it's going to be good karma for them, but those who do good deeds, regardless of politics or anything like that, those are the people who are likely people you'll want to side with in an SHTF, and they very well may be the saints, the good Samaritans. It really will be a great who's who exercise when it does all go down. And I'm a counselor and addictions counselor, as I've said before, and I work with people who are, and they'll tell you themselves, they're masters of deception, because you have to be. Dishonesty is it's a huge part of addiction. As people who are addicts, they need to lie in order to function in society. And I don't mean this in a derogatory way. Most addicts will tell you that, yes, I've had to lie, that dishonesty is integral to being an addict. So for me, it's a good exercise in lie detection, because not everybody I see is being truthful. Some people lie about their use, or, they minimize certain things about themselves. But all I can say is that it's very, very complicated to do this with accuracy, especially when it comes to addiction. Because some people are such good liars, and it's very difficult to see past the facades and the masks people wear. And, I can only wonder, when will I get taken, in a shit hit the fan situation? Will I get swindled? Because there are some really good damn liars out there. And, I'm a pretty good-natured person, and I want to help people, and I worry that a lot of people who are good-natured are at risk of people who are, liars and deceitful and quote-unquote evil. And on the other hand, some people may appear to be arrogant. They may appear to be stuck up and ignorant, and kind of, they might keep to themselves. They might appear antisocial. But, they might turn out to be the complete obvious in a shit hit the fan scenario. You see those kind of people in the movies sometimes. The guy that everybody thinks is the asshole, and it turns out, that he actually wasn't a bad guy in the end, and he helps out. And there's a lot of characters like that in Hollywood movies where they sort of create some mystery around, oh, is this guy good and this guy bad? And they show him in kind of a bad light until, the protagonist needs help or something like that. So I guess it's important that also we don't become absolutists in our views about people, but it is a good exercise just to sit there and brainstorm who would be good, who would be bad. The longer that it ensues, it's going to become clear where everybody stands. Who is an asshole? Who's a wimp? Who is a racist? Who is a rapist? Who is a saint? All these things are going to become clear cut. The problem is that in our current postmodern, politically correct society we live in, there's this notion, that there is no truth, and everybody is a little bit of everything. I see people dressed in, they look like they're cowboys, and they're listening to rap music, and they're driving a Prius. That's just the nature of the day and age in which we live. Everybody's a little bit of everything. So it's hard to pick out what's what. But as times become more difficult, things are going to come into focus. People's character is going to become more apparent when they can't conceal it with this wide array of products. When they can't afford to conceal their true ideas and views with fake smiles. Lots of people can afford to do that now. When we can't conceal it with culture, and really culture is something that is based on human desires. It's not based on needs. Everybody needs to eat, everybody needs to sleep, everybody needs security. Culture is something that emerges out of that perhaps, but it's independent of that. And in the absence of, you know, those desires, the absence of that culture, you know, it's going to become obvious who is on the good side of the Force and who's with the Sith or the dark side of the Force, right? So anyways, just some thoughts for you to ponder, and maybe you have some good insights as to what to look for in individuals. You know, who are the threats? You know, who are the people that we should watch out for in an SHTF scenario? You can get into the psychology of it and look into, you know, the personality disorders and, you know, rank them in terms of liabilities. You know, but I'm just interested in your own sort of methods as to how you would go about sizing people up. Because without a doubt, should something of that magnitude ever transpire, you're going to be faced with decisions. And a lot of people don't have the street smarts nowadays. Like a lot of people, especially the suburban masses, you know, they don't have the street smarts like a lot of people who do live below the poverty line do still have. They know who's a bullshitter and who's not. It's amazing how many of my clients, sorry I'm going off again, but how many of my clients come from a impoverished background who are forced to be raised in the streets and to know, you know, who's trying to take advantage of them and who's not. And, you know, a lot of people who come into that world, who fall into it perhaps from a suburban lifestyle, you know, maybe they want to buy some drugs or something, they typically will get swindled a lot because they can't see the angles of things like those people who are, you know, conditioned to the street can. Anyways, what are your thoughts on this? Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. You might notice that I've authorized advertisements to be put in my videos. And the reason why I've done that is because I've induced that it's very likely that YouTube only sort of promotes videos that provide that. I mean, and why wouldn't they, right? I mean, they want to make money. So I don't do this to make money. You know, there's much better things I could do with my time, I assure you. You know, if I then making $5-10 on every video, you know, it's simply not worth my time. But I do this because I find it fascinating. But I do it also because I do want to build up my viewership a bit, and I think one of the ways I can do that is by permitting, you know, YouTube to post a few ads on some of my videos. You know, you don't have to click on them. I just put them there so that perhaps it'll bump me up in the ability to have my videos seen and stuff like that. Hopefully. That's just a theory. If I don't notice any major change, then I might turn it off. But just thought I'd provide that disclaimer there. Anyways, I might be gone for a few days, so enjoy your week and your weekend, of course. Canadian Prepper out. Take care.